As always, it is my intention to give you something of value, of equal or greater value than the time, energy, and attention that you expend, or I would hope invest, into this video today. Today I want to talk about the topic of belief systems, specifically limiting or limited belief systems. And I found it fascinating to discover that limiting belief systems has the same abbreviation, LBS, limiting belief systems, as weight or pounds. Pounds abbreviated as LBS. And I immediately made this association that limiting belief systems, very much like extra pounds, weigh us down and make us feel heavy, lethargic, slow us down, right? And eventually wear us out. We want to just give up. That effect is happening physically in our bodies, but it also happens in our minds. More importantly, in our minds. Because the truth is, whatever we believe to be true is that our ego is built, is given to us as a gift to help prove us right, right? Now that could be used for better or for worse. It has its pros and cons. And ego gets a very bad rap, oftentimes. All of the negative things that the ego does, specifically when it comes to pride. But I think there's a case that can be made that the ego is only doing what we tell it to do, right? It's obeying our wishes, our commands. And the command center is in our mind. So whatever we believe to be true about ourselves, about the world around us, about God, our ego is designed to prove us right. And I don't know all the reasons behind that design, but I say if that is the ego's job, is to serve us by proving our belief systems right, well then what we need to do and what we can do, what we have the power to do, is change those belief systems. And I've also heard people talk about belief systems in general, and some people call it BS, right, because of the abbreviation. And then limiting belief systems, LBS, same as pounds. And I'm starting to see that in many respects, belief systems are limited or limiting belief systems by default. But either way, I think there's a connection here between our belief systems and the limitations with which we experience life because of this design of our ego to fulfill and to prove us right. Now the problem is, oftentimes, is that what we believe to be true isn't necessarily true. We call it our truth, or because we believe it, we say it must be true, when really we just have a limited amount of information. So we're giving, what we call a belief or our truth is really just our perception based on our experience, our DNA, our education, our perception, our trauma in our lives. And really, I think it's very important that we catch ourselves when we say, I believe something, to understand the belief is really just my perception. It's my understanding to date. And that it may change, it may well change. And it's easy to say, if I look back at what I believed to be true when I was 5, quite different than what I believed to be true when I was 15, 25, 35, now at 57. So my beliefs, although that sounds like a really strong word and it's immutable, right? My beliefs are really my perceptions, and they're always in motion, always constantly changing, or can be. I can also cut that cut that off and say, no, I believe what I believe, and you're never going to change my mind. But really what I'm saying is, I'm never going to change my mind. And if I don't change my mind, I certainly won't change reality. Because reality, in essence, is what we believe it to be. Our ego proves it to be. We have this part in our brain called a reticular activating system that helps us focus because there's so much terabytes of information coming in through our senses, all around us, intuition, spirits talking to us. And so there's information overload at all times, as long as we're awake, right? Which is why sleep is so important. You got to process all that stuff. And what our brain actually does physically, I found out, is it kicks out the stuff that's no longer necessary, that's cluttering up our brain, files it away somewhere, right? So that we can concentrate and focus on what is most important. But what is most important is what we've decided is most important by our belief systems. And by nature, as a finite being, as a human, our belief systems, of course, they're going to be limited. If they were unlimited, that would mean we are omniscient, that we know everything about everything all the time. And I know some people who you might say seem to operate that way, that they think they do know everything about everything all the time, which of course, that's a limiting belief system as well. And in fact, anybody who knows anything about anything, the smarter that they get, the more information that they get, the more they understand, the more they understand that they don't understand. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And Sadhguru, in one of his talks, he talks about how we as human beings tend to take 3, 4, 5 pieces of this puzzle we call life, and we're working really hard to fit them together, right? And then we get the pieces together, we see a pattern, which is how we understand the world. And we see the pattern, it looks like tiger stripes. And so we say, I get it. Life is a tiger, metaphorically. But what we have forgotten or conveniently pushed aside is the fact that there are 8 billion pieces to the puzzle, maybe more, maybe infinite number of pieces to the puzzle. So no matter how many pieces I fit together, it's still a limited understanding, and I call it my belief. And by adding the word belief to it, it seems very strong. And in fact, our ego, it gets their attention. My ego says, this is what you believe. Well, you certainly don't want to be wrong. So let's do everything to see everything and experience everything that will only prove that what you believe is right. And here's where we get into trouble as humans, is that whatever I believe to be right, and I put a big B on belief or a big T on what I say is my truth, then it becomes immutable, right? And no matter what anybody else thinks or feels or says, I defend my position. And now already I've put up walls and I've created division between me and pretty much anybody else who doesn't think exactly the way I think. You don't have to think very hard to see how this plays itself out, especially in our society now, is that we've got these devices in our hand and the algorithm behind them, the supercomputers behind them, intentionally give us more of what we're looking for. Right? This is the way the program works. And the supercomputers, as was illustrated in the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. If you've ever seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, or if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It just talks about the computing behind the social media algorithms is designed to automatically feed you more content that you slow down on, that you like, that you comment on. Why? It's not because it's right or because it's true. It's because it wants to keep your eyeballs on the screen as long as possible so that more ads can be served up to you. Therefore, more money can be generated. That's the business model of social media. The problem with that is, and it is becoming a super important and super divisive process, actually tearing at the fabric of our society, is that if all the news that I get, if all the information, if all the data that I get continues to confirm what I believe to be true, whether or not it actually is true or is only a partial truth, then it only reinforces that I'm right and everyone else is wrong. So even in my own family, I'm in California, they're in Montana, and when something big is happening in the world, like an election, etc., I will receive all this data and information on my feeds that confirms everything that I believe to be true. And they are receiving that as well on their end. But they're looking for something different, right? They're scrolling, they've got a different perception, they click on different things than I do. Supercomputers don't have any moral or ethical boundaries or filters. It just is data to a computer. So the data I'm looking for gives me more. The data that my mom and dad are looking for gives them more. And so we become entrenched in our belief system, even though it's very limited because we get so much confirmation that, yeah, I'm right and you're wrong. But they're getting the same thing on their end. Well, everything I read, Joe, everything that I see says blah, blah, blah. And they'll send me links and I'll send them links. And does that really help? No. Unless both of us, all of us, are willing to suspend our belief system and ask questions, right? Because questions by nature is curiosity, and curiosity suspends judgment. And judgment comes in many forms. Judgment may just be, I made the decision that what I think to be true is true, no matter what other data may come my way. But that judgment actually kills the possibility of learning something new. In fact, Sadhguru also said, be very careful of drawing conclusions, because every time you draw a conclusion, you have shut the door on every other possibility, right? That's why I say, this is my own words, that I think one of the most dangerous two-word phrases in the English language is, I know. Just think about that. Whenever I say, I know, I have decided, and I'm telling myself and my ego that I understand everything that there is to understand about any given issue. And I am closing myself off to any other possibility. Well, there's a problem there, right? Because there's infinite amount of information. The universe is vast, way more than I can comprehend. And certainly in my finite mind and my experience, I only get a trickle of this data. So I have to remind myself, and I encourage you as well, to remind yourself that the information that you've got, the experience that you have, the education that you have, is all excellent. It's helpful to gather that data, that information, but be careful of drawing conclusions. This was Sadhguru's point. In fact, he went to the extent of saying when you draw a conclusion, it's like cutting yourself off. It's the beginning of the death. It is a small death towards the big death because you've stopped growing in that area. And this is why I think it's very important that we don't pursue perfection because, one, it's very discouraging. Perfection is elusive. It's really undefined. And two, perfection, if we ever get to this place where I feel like I've reached the peak, the summit, I've got it all together, then by nature I stop climbing. I stop growing. I stop striving, right? And life by nature is growth. We talked about this before. And if you're not growing, many people say, including science, if you're not growing, you're dying. There is no just holding still. And yet we will hold fast to our beliefs because we believe that what we believe is the truth with a capital T, and therefore we have to defend it. Otherwise, we're going to be embarrassed or humiliated. So I go back to Jesus' words where he tells the disciples, hey, look at these kids, right? The kids get it right. They understand what the kingdom of God is like. And the kingdom of God has been debated throughout the centuries. But he's given us a clue here. Kids are always curious. The first question is always why. And then they follow with more whys and more whys. And that's good, right? Because they're asking to understand. But once we stop asking why, then we've shut the door. And then it becomes a limiting or limited belief system. If it's about myself, it's what I believe about me, it's a limiting belief system because I don't think that I can do anything else. And as Henry Ford made it very clear, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right, because your ego will prove that to be true. It's very interesting. If you think you can or you think you can't, you will be right. So that's a limiting belief system when it's about me, what I believe about me and my capabilities. And it's a limited belief system if it's about somebody else or something else, because I've put a boundary on what is possible. This is vital. So when we were kids, growing up in school, and we got to this place where we're studying literature and we're going to watching movies, I remember I think it was an English teacher that was teaching about willful suspension of disbelief. Willful suspension of disbelief, he said, is required when you go to a movie, especially if you're going to see a science fiction or an epic adventure or a drama that is really fantastical. It's outside the bounds of real life, right? And as you're watching it, if you're using all of your analytical and skeptical faculties, you'll take all the fun right out of the movie because you'll say, that could never happen. Yeah, right. I can't believe that, especially, if it's a fantasy, science fiction, etc. And it's built to be in a context way different than our reality. So we have to have a willful suspension of our disbelief so that we don't ruin the fun and take the fun right out of that experience. And I've come to believe just recently that I must adopt a willful suspension of belief, willful suspension of my beliefs, because I have so often in my life defended my beliefs, believing that what I was taught and what I experience and what I understand and the way I interpret things is the capital T truth. No, it's just my truth, and that's a very tough word to use, a very sensitive word. It's a small t, but really, it's not a truth, it's a belief, and the belief is just my perception that I believe to be true. So, questions, as I said, are the answer. How so? Not just the why question, but what else? Right? What else? Okay, here's what I know. What else is there? Which is kind of like the scientific mind. Even when science proves a theorem to be true and it becomes a law, they don't stop now and say, okay, my life is over. Now I'm going to retire. No, what else? And I think it's built into our system, right? As kids, we're always exploring and wondering how things work. They want to know, and what else is there? And, kids have what's now called ADD or ADHD because once they figure that out, then they're on to the next thing. And I say, let's tap into that nature, that childlike nature of asking what else? Here's what I know, or here's what I think I know. But rather than saying that's it, ask the question, what else? It's a willful suspension of my beliefs. Why is this so important? Not just important for our growth and our understanding of ourselves and our connections with the universe, but for our connections with each other. because it tears down the dividing walls, which is a very biblical phrase, by the way. Paul said about Jesus in Ephesians that Jesus' love was here to tear down the walls of division. Slave versus free, Jew versus Greek, Samaritans versus blah, blah, blah. And in this whole litany, this list of divisions, and each person, each group digs into their position and says, I'm right, and therefore everybody else is wrong. What if both could be true? This is one of my favorite phrases. There's a business book, a very famous business book, a defining business book called Good to Great, and the author is Jim Collins. And one of the premises in his book that I have adopted is that we tend to separate our worlds into either or propositions. You hear a lot about dualities and dichotomies in this world, but quite honestly, the world is a spectrum. It's not an either or. And he would suggest, and I would suggest this as well, when I come up with an either or proposition, or I perceive one, to immediately suspend my decision about whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, up or down, and say, what else, right? It's a spectrum. So it's a both and if it's more than two things, it's a yes and, rather than either or, a yes and, adopt that. Now people say, well, that's the slippery slope, Joe, because everything can't be true, and what if you get deceived, or what if you get led down a bad path? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is keep myself open to the possibility that I don't know, or that I only know just a portion, and that other perceptions, regardless of the source, may actually provide more of an insight into what I think I know. And quite honestly, I'm good at that, because the Bible itself says that all truth is God's truth. That's the big T, right? All universal truth is God's truth anyway. All wisdom begins with God. And so if I'm willing to look anywhere and everywhere for more evidence about what is true in the universal sense, in essence, I'm looking for God in anything and everything and everyone. And by the way, he's already there. God is omnipresent, which means in everything and everywhere there is evidence of God, because he's there. It's just a matter of looking for it, finding what is true in plain sight, and being willing to suspend my limited beliefs so that I don't limit myself both to what I think or believe or who I think I am. So I hope this is very helpful, that as you're going through your day and you're drawing conclusions and you think, I know, or you say, I know, and then you dig in to defend that, realize that this is what the ego is built for, but now it is your enemy, because it's the enemy of your growth. But you can flip the switch. You can flip the script and put the enemy on your side. The ego doesn't have to be your enemy. It actually could be your friend. Its desire is self-preservation. It's one of the strongest instincts that we have. Self-preservation. So if you open yourself to possibilities and you say, what else? And what if? And I don't know, so I want to know more. And your ego sees that and feels it and hears it. It flips and becomes your friend and says, okay, what else? What else is there? What else can I know? What else can I learn? And then it becomes your ally instead of your enemy. So flip the script. Flip your ego. Put it on your side. Suspend your limited and limiting beliefs and open yourself to the possibility that the universal truth, the truth that is of God, is available to you all the time, everywhere, regardless of the source, because the source is him.